If there's any pianist who keeps hanging around my channel to see if I've been up to something, I'll say a resounding yes. What was my fight with the third? Well, in a resounding and utter failure. I just kept being unable to articulate thirds that sounded like a single note. And that's the problem, they must sound like a single note, inevitably. I already mentioned that there is a fundamental problem at the level of the posture of each finger, that each one must attack the key that corresponds to it at a very precise angle and position, and that this position must be incorporated into the motor memory in an indelible way, or the problem reappears. That idea is not entirely wrong, but after months of dedicating myself to something else and reflecting on this of the self-taught mature adult who cannot incorporate certain movements with the ease of a child who still has a small hand, I also discovered a question for me much more serious and profound behind the matter. Or it could be my personal key to revisit the problem, considering the size of my hand and especially my fingers, which is far from the typical thin fingers of a child that those who started playing the piano have from a very young age. In this aspect, I am not interested in the fact that there are gifted adults who learn and play as if they had learned it in another life. Circus freaks don't interest me. I am here to find out what my problem is. Because I am interested in my learning, not the neighbors. This is for Whitey, because I know your habit of constantly harassing me with unsolicited recommendations. And, if someone is in the same situation as me, who most likely won't be reading this because they'd rather go to the experts in normal, all-knowing hands and copy their ideas, and if they work for you, then maybe he will progress in his path. I don't know if he is a musician or a machine, it depends on whether or not he is aware of his body. Well, if your anatomy favors you, you might not notice the difference between playing consciously and playing like a machine. If things they work, you won't mind too much about it. I'm not against mechanics, the piano may inevitably require it, so I won't condemn it. What can bother me is hearing performances that sound too much the same on different people. I suspect something is wrong with them. I'll leave the subject there. I was saying that I think I have discovered the secret of the problem. Actually, someone who taught how scales came to my mind and said that it was very important to start slowly and with high fingers. In this adult stage, I had teachers who, ignoring the issue of the dimensions and features of my hand, tried to lead me to the technique of playing with the fingers glued to the keys as soon as possible, as well as to incorporate the use of wrist turns, elbow movements, shoulder movements and the use of the whole body. A comment from a YouTuber questioning a teacher who taught wrist twists, and asserting that he had been taught that everything was done with the fingers also came to mind. It seemed like a despicable troll comment, but I stuck with it, and when I decided to start over a couple of weeks ago, I set about applying that. There is a fundamental reason, especially in a large hand, to base the touch on the fingers, and that is that it has enough weight for it. My fingers alone are strong and heavy enough to solve many things. So I took advantage of that advantage. I started to get detached from the keyboard, I started to let go of the wrist twists I didn't need and all the elbow, arm and shoulder assists I didn't need. It is not a question of adopting a rigid position, but of giving priority to the use of the fingers in the touch, feeling and seeing very well the difference between squeezing and lifting the fingers. I began to discover that I had no finger independence, and if I didn't have it for playing single notes, I wouldn't have it for playing thirds, chords, or sixths either. That led me to a patient restudy of Bayer, yes, again, to patiently build that concept. And in a few days I started to feel completely different, everything was safer and less tiring, and I achieved a basic agility that I couldn't reach before. My theory is, big and heavy hand will play only with fingers, always lifting them very well. Forget about the tight touch while the independence of the fingers is not consolidated. And the movements of the wrist, of the arm, of the elbow, just let them appear in their minimum expression, what is necessary. I use the relative rule of keeping the fingertips as close and forward as possible to the black keys, except in certain touches of thirds with the thumb, although not in a rigorous way, but considering it as something convenient. Something very important, do not touch with the tips of the fingers except where it is unavoidable. Avoid the tips of the fingers as much as possible. Josh said so. Use the tips, and if they are quite flat, the better, although you have to watch out for excessive drooping on the wrists, especially the left. Another discovery for me, avoid very expressive pianos like Piano Teku, or the poor dynamics of true pianos. I think that both are excellent for demonstrations by already trained pianists, but not for developing the independence of the fingers. The excellent dynamics and the hard sound typical of an upright piano I only find in MDA, even if it sounds incredible. MDA is giving me what I was looking for, with the particular adjustments that I gave it. My personal piano sounds highly metallic and somewhat out of tune, but it's what I need and I notice it every day. It is the piano that gives me mastery of the fingers. What is the piano played with? With the fingers. Always, even if you are helping with the rest, the fingers should already be very strong and independent, the sound very pure and independent for each note. And the expression should never destroy that independence. And the speed of progress is strictly related to maintaining and developing the independence of the fingers. When we start to put things together prematurely, it will be the beginning of a disaster. This is the theory that I am testing, and I will hardly publish the results, due to many reasons that I spoke of repeatedly. I simply comment my theory for curious pianists. I have retained something from all of them and their ideas come back to my mind every time I face a difficulty. I remain still for a moment and decide if it is good to continue, until something comes to mind. And when I'm satisfied, I let it rest. Is working. If there's any pianist